Good evening. Welcome to the January 14th, 2025 meeting of the Carrboro Town Council. This is a work session this evening. There will be no formal action taken, no votes, except for I would like a motion to excuse Councilmember Randy Haven O'Donnell, who is not with us this evening, please.
So moved.
Seconded.
All right, it's been moved and properly seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? It's on a delay. Thank you, Councilmember Posada. Motion carries 6-0. And we also have council members Posada and Palmer joining us virtually this evening. And thank you. Town Manager Tony, did you want to kind of introduce the item for this evening for the work session? Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. The item here before us is really just designed to create a framework for you all, Town Council, to review the options, opportunities around closing Weaver Street. We're calling it reimagining Weaver Street, to look at some possibilities, some pros, some cons, things to consider while looking at this space and what the space could be if a closure did occur. So presenting the presentation tonight is Ms. Tina Moon, and she's been working on, you can come on up, Tina, as well as Duncan and Becca. They have been just a really great team in fleshing things out for this presentation.
Great, thanks for that introduction.
All right, welcome, Tina.
Thanks. So slightly new layout. Let me go ahead and share if I may.
Just a reminder that those of us here in the Zoom side of things are much like viewers at home via YouTube under normal times, which is to say we cannot hear more or less anything unless you are very close to your microphone.
Okay,
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer.
success so far, okay. Okay, get my bearings. Okay, and thank you for that. Everyone's hearing me okay?
Just
Okay.
speak a little closer, Tina.
We all have kind of a dry cough and planning, so I'll do my best to get through it. So, good evening again. As Manager Tony just described, what we have put together tonight is a series of slides to help kind of offer some structure to your conversation tonight. And I have a loose outline for the way the presentation is structured. And so we'll start with some common terms, just so that we're all talking about the same thing tonight. Jump to placemaking. How is the street used now? How might it be used differently in the future? Kind of an overview of pedestrian streets and pedestrian spaces in general. Talk about some case studies, some trends, what tends to make things successful. And then the bulk of the presentation is really about considerations. And we've tried to structure this not only in terms of capacity, because there is a strong transportation component to this, but also to look at it through some of our lenses, so climate action, race and equity, et cetera. And then we'll jump to some logistics, and from there I'll stop, be available for questions, and let you all have your conversation. So, and I know that you have the presentation in your packet, so I may not go through and read every line, but I think most of you have heard some of these terms before. But we did want to make sure that you were all using the same terms in the same way for our conversation tonight. So we wanted to be clear about, pedestrian street versus something that was really more of a plaza. So a transportation focus versus more of kind of a congregation or a gathering space, something that might have furniture, features like fountains and such. We actually have in the town code a place street, although we have not assigned that to a particular street so far. That was based on a skateboarding request years ago. We are all familiar, I think now, after the town adopted a complete street text amendment and policy a few years ago, of a street that provides facilities for all modes. And then a term that is often used in different contexts is the Woonerf, so kind of the Dutch-based concept, which really is a street for all modes, but one that has traffic calming. So we want to be clear about how that term should be used. So let's start with talking about how the street is used now. So, and this is a great image because it really shows the fact that right now, East Weaver Street is in fact a complete street. You see facilities for all modes, the sidewalks, the shared use markings for the Sharrow, as well as a vehicle, and the vehicle's parked in the loading zone as a reminder that there are deliveries on this street, and the bus stop just a little bit farther ahead, the bike corral, et cetera. Another view showing all the different modes in action. So our first rainbow crosswalk, certainly bus facilities are important in Carrboro, and on this street we have 2 routes that go along Weaver Street, and then another view of just pedestrians taking advantage of the weather and Weaver Street in our downtown. We also use East Weaver Street for events. Here's a great picture of one of our parades. We also use it a lot for.
Can you share screen?
Am I not share screen?
Not on Zoom.
Oh, pardon me. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, back to event space. So as you can see, we use Weaver Street both for the parade. We use it for a number of road races. And we're pointing those out in particular because if you look at the slide on the left, you see how many people are in the street for those images. And so it's something to think about, particularly the road race, when we think about maybe adding furniture or other features that would be permanent. We have put together a couple of conceptual, these are very high-level conceptual images, just as we've described, to help you reimagine what Weaver Street could be if you all were to go on the route of taking it out of the transportation space. Clearly, this is not to scale, but this is the first of 2 images. This is looking toward the east. You can see Weaver Street on your right. And you can see what is a pedestrian type of a corridor on the left, but very much an active street, playful elements, something that is very much kind of a gathering space, along with some stormwater features and so forth. Here's a different image which includes some of the same features, but it's worth noting that this includes not just a pedestrian corridor facility, but something for bikes. And it's worth, I think, noting, at least for me, a lot of folks who have mentioned over the years their interest of seeing Weaver Street closed tend to be bicyclists. And so I think it's important as we discuss this to figure out where would the bicyclists go, how to accommodate that interest within a pedestrian-oriented space. So let's shift to some of the case studies, and many thanks to Becca and Duncan again for doing some research to put this together. We've been trying to identify examples of pedestrian spaces, mainly in the US, but also abroad, to try to figure out what made them successful and what not so much. And so the picture on the screen here is Pearl Street in Colorado. This is an example of a pedestrian-only street. We've also discovered examples of streets where it's pedestrian-focused, but it may be open during certain times of the day for delivery or businesses. This may be something that would be appropriate for Weaver Street, as well as recognizing examples of pedestrian streets which were closed to vehicle traffic for quite a number of years and subsequently reopened. And that's what we have seen locally here in Fayetteville Street in Raleigh. So trying to get a sense of looking at these examples, what makes pedestrian zones or pedestrian streets successful? And we've noticed a number of trends. And this is pretty important, and you can read in detail in the memo. But you'll notice that over, 150 or so of these streets that have been put in place since the late 1900s, there's really only about 10% that are still in working as pedestrian streets. And the factors that we seem to be seeing that make them successful is features such as existing foot traffic. These tend not to be facilities that will turn around a downtown. It really needs to be a downtown that's already successful. Features such as a draw, like a water feature, not something that's relevant here, but the type of thing that makes these successful. Accessibility, that has to do not only with, in some cases, a place to park, if this is a destination rather than just a transportation corridor, but also accessibility in terms of thinking about the surface and who can access it. So cobblestones may be wonderful and charming, but may have some ADA implications. The use in terms of businesses along the corridor, some of these design features, comfort, et cetera. So I'll move on ahead. Thinking about considerations, and again, this is probably the bulk of our discussion today. Carrboro isn't technically a grid town, but it does have certain grid elements. And so if you look at this image, Main Street is our main east-west corridor, Greensboro our main north-south corridor. But Weaver Street also serves as a main east-west, as does Roberson, and just south of the slide, Braxton-Fouché Street. And I've added those little bike images just as a reminder of the potential conflict point coming out from Libby-Cotton. And so it's important to look at this kind of in the zoom out point of view, because if you move traffic from one street, where does it go? How does that impact the overall network? This is a great kind of at-a-glance look at different types of users, and this came from the mobility report card, so the data is pretty current, 2023. This is a report that our MPO puts together. And so you can see from this, the average number of trips, and these have actually been going down a little bit, but the average number of trips on East Weaver Street is just under 7,000. There's 1,100, 500 on East Main Street for the same section. You can see, again, 2 bus routes on Weaver Street and 1 on East Main Street, and a number of bikes, cyclists, and pedestrians. And this gives you a sense of that whole triangle area. So this comes to the big question. If Weaver Street is closed, where do those that almost 7,000 trips go? And this is really the importance of doing some type of a capacity analysis to try to get a sense of that. We can guess maybe that perhaps the majority of those folks might take East Main Street. But again, some of it has to do with destinations, and some of it has to do with familiarity with Carrboro. Some folks may choose to take the entrance to Carmill, go around Harris Teeter if they're heading toward Greensboro. Some folks may instead take Roberson Place. We may even have some people choose to take Braxton-Fouché Street. How this works in collaboration with the 203 project, the Dradeford Library, I think is something that we just want to think about. Typically a library has slightly different peaks, but there is the black box theater. There's also the use of the art center. So it's just some information that I think we might want to gather to have a sense of what types of impact would this have. Would it lead to considerable stacking, not just on Weaver Street, but potentially on Greensboro? I think those are things that we'd like to have a little bit more information about. So another big thing to think about in terms of complete streets and our interest in transportation demand management is having a sense of the impact to transit. This is a great slide because it really shows the bus routes, Chapel Hill Transit, again, the 2 routes on East Weaver, the one route, the J route on Main Street. There's also Triangle Transit with their 400, 405 that has a major stop to Durham that shares that stop on East Main Street. So again, if Weaver Street is closed to traffic, how might those routes be adjusted? We added that arrow, that left-hand light blue arrow, because that might be a difficult turning radius for a bus. And so there's a question about, well, would the buses just move over a block, or would we lose a pretty good section of transit through the downtown? We've had those initial conversations with Chapel Hill Transit just to get a sense of things, but no further. So those would be things that would be further conversations you might wish to have. How would the space be used? John Hartman Brown here has spoken to some of the local business owners and has gotten some general thoughts for them. I think all in all, there's been some support for this. We would certainly have to take a look at how deliveries would be handled. And we have a few on-street parking spots along the corridor. Would the space essentially just become an extension of Weaver Street Market? You know, would it be pulling a private space into what's now a public space? How would that work? If folks went there, how would that, which is technical, let me say that sentence better. If folks were to leave the private space to go into what would be now a public space, how would that affect parking and the towing challenges? So again, just some things to think about. Another element related to kind of activating the space is the consideration of open containers. You know, if the space became pretty much an extension of the existing restaurants and the tendency to extend tables or just casually wandering out, would we have to create some type of a social district to allow for open containers in those spaces? So things that we'd want to take a look at, some considerations. Climate action. Great opportunities to do some different plantings, better stormwater features. We have had some initial conversations with our climate action folks about potentially trying to capture air quality data. Still kind of exploring that, but an opportunity to see if this might provide better air quality along East Weaver Street. I think we would want to be sure to study points in a number of locations to make sure we're not just moving air from East Weaver to East Main. You know, folks who are then waiting for the bus with even more of a exhaust issue than the concerns on East Weaver. So again, lots of opportunities, some things we'd want to think about. And then this slide, again, another great slide, and thanks for the rest of the team on helping to put these together. But this shows also, you know, the conversations that we've had with some of the folks from the different neighborhoods in the downtown as part of the downtown area plan. What are their experiences now? What experiences might they have if this was to go through? I think we've heard from some of the folks in the Lloyd Broad neighborhood and the Tim Top neighborhood about concerns getting out of their neighborhoods. You know, traffic now, delays with the lights. And these are folks who may have some of the older neighbors may have some accessibility challenges and may find themselves having to drive in certain situations just to get from point A to point B. Would this end up making them drive kind of in a much more circuitous route just to get to the grocery store and things like that? So again, just things to think about. And so from here, I just want to jump into some of the logistics because I suspect that that's where a lot of folks are particularly interested. So again, this is a relatively small street. You know, the right-of-way is about 50 feet. The actual curb to curb is about 30 to maybe 33, depending on the actual location. If you think about this room, which is maybe about 22 feet wide, so it's not a huge area to work with. We have worked with the town engineer to try to come up with a couple of, again, high-level illustrative plans about what might this look like. This shows, this first example shows pretty much just adding a different type of a pavement just to kind of accentuate the space, to add some additional plantings, and maybe some other types of features, so very much a pedestrian plaza. The second image introduces a playful kind of meandering path in the middle. This could be something just to kind of add some spice to the corridor. It could be something that's designated, say, for cyclists or for people walking through. And then this last one includes the idea of having kind of a designated bike lane. And this is something in this particular image that we've thought of that might be something where you might have a service lane. This would provide for those deliveries, and would maybe be open for, say, 5 a.m. to 11 a.m., and then it would be closed to vehicles, but would be a designated place for bicyclists. The one thing that I just want to draw your attention to is the little green bike boxes at either end. One of the things to think about with the cycling community is how do they enter the space, and then how do they leave the space, so that there isn't a situation where cyclists just kind of fly through and then head right into vehicle traffic without really paying attention of the fact that they're leaving a protected space and going back into traffic. So those are some things that we would want to think about. In terms of some potential steps, we have worked with the town attorney to get a proposal with some costs, and this would involve, in this example, a capacity study, which would be an opportunity to try to project where those trips would go. It would likely make sense to try to go back and take a look at the TIA put together for the Draper Library and try to include those figures for those projections as well. Depending on how that, or what that reveals, we would certainly bring that back to you all. And that would have to be reviewed and approved by DOT. And that would, assuming that it was determined to be, something that could be successful, you would likely want to have some type of an engagement period, and with potential designs to actually go out to the community and talk about some options. The construction plans that are identified here are really just for closing the road. The actual cost of putting in some type of a plaza would be in addition to what's showing here, and the cost of that obviously would vary depending on what type of treatment that you wanted to do. So it could be relatively modest, it could be a rather expensive project. What would certainly need to happen just for safety is some type of change to the signals, and this would be, a number of signals at the Roberson end, but also a signal at the Greensboro end, and some type of a physical barrier that would keep vehicles from entering the space. When we have closings now, we usually have, public works folks out there, or we have some type of large vehicle or something of that sort. So we would want to take into consideration not only how to stop vehicles, but making sure that all of that was visible and easy to see, and that we had safety considerations taken into account. And so with that, maybe I'll pause and let you all have some discussion.
Thank you so much, Tina. This is a great presentation. Lots of good information to get us started. I think I would want to see if either Councilmember Posada or Palmer had any initial comments. I don't want to forget that they're there. Any initial comments, Councilmember Palmer or Posada, before we go into the room?
Just to echo your thanks to staff, Tina especially, for coming out to present this. But everyone who worked on this, I loved the level of detail in the packet, and I love having some alternatives, some different visions for what the space might look like.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer. Councilmember Posada, you don't have anything right now? I guess that means no. Oh, here he is.
Yeah, I just had one question, Tina, because I'm concerned about well, I like the fact that we're exploring this and, again, and also, echo my thanks for the presentation. I'm looking at, again, you mentioned that there are some conversations already around what this would do for the bus lines. And I see in the one of the concepts has kind of like a service delivery area, but, is there any examples of where there's been restricted access only for like bus routes in some of these spaces? Is that even feasible in this piece? And I might be getting putting the cart in front of the horse, but or whatever the saying is on that.
Yes, there are some examples of these types of facilities where there may be vehicle access only for buses. And that's something, if that is an interest, that we could look at and come back.
And thank you for that. 'Cause I'm curious what if we do decide to move forward with closing the street, which preliminary I'm in favor of. I would definitely want to make it as accessible as possible for folks to be able to spend time there, kind of create some of these environmental qualities that would be great. I'm just curious how that would impact folks, right? So I'm very much interested in hearing a little bit more about that. And seeing even if that's a possibility as we move forward in this piece. And then my other question, and this is something that I've been thinking about, specifically after what happened in New Orleans a couple of weeks ago. What would, and again, I might be putting the cart and the horse thing. What would some of those security measures look like? Would it be like those bollards that like come in and out, or like some of those big balls that are in front of Target? Like, what would that look like?
I think that's a great question. We have had some initial conversations about keeping vehicles out. And I know at one point during open streets, Public Works actually came out and brought large trucks. I think there were dump trucks as a protective measure. That would probably create a slightly different aesthetic than what I think you had envisioned. So I think that would be a conversation that we would have with DOT. If you chose to do some type of, say, a temporary measure or something like that, we would want to really come together with a plan, an engineer-prepared plan that would talk about how the closure would work, what protective measures would be in place, and we would certainly want to speak to the police department about that as well. And if I may, because that reminds me of a point I forgot to make, one of the potential concerns would be with EMS, emergency access, limiting the police and their entrances, the potential for queuing, making it difficult for emergency vehicles, fire, rescue, et cetera. So I just want to add that point as well.
No, thank you for that. I guess those are all the questions I have, and then council members, when we get down to the discussion piece, I may have some more comments, but for now, I'm good. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Posada. Councilmember Merrill is ready.
Yeah, I think this is really exciting. Thanks to staff for putting together such a detailed presentation. Just some thoughts as far as capacity is concerned, capacity of Main Street. It's worth noting that if you go on NCDOT and look at their annual average daily traffic for that stretch of Main Street, where presumably a lot of this traffic would be pushed, in 2003, 20 years ago, give or take, there were 21,000 trips per day. And so now it's down to 11,500. So even if we push those 6,800 over, we're still have fewer cars on that stretch of road than we had 20 years ago. So certainly if the road had the capacity then for that traffic, it has it now. One potential benefit, and I don't know how we model this or figure this out, but at least to, I don't know, I'm curious what potential benefits on the stacking there would be from removing the third phase. Because as it is with a 5-point intersection, we've got 3 light phases. If we get down to 2, I know a lot of the traffic that stacks up at 5 o'clock is because some people are trying to go on Weaver Street and some people are trying to go on Main. I could see some potential efficiency from taking out that Weaver Street movement and just having people go down Main. I don't know, but I don't know how we figure that out. I task you guys with that. I trust you to be able to manage it. And then the only other thing, top of mind, was just I want to make sure that we as a council hear directly from affected business owners, both on Weaver Street and Main Street, before we. I would really, I've already had some reach out to me, and I have some meetings set up in the next week or two. But I want to make sure that we're really hearing from them, and that it's a conversation that we're having with them directly, and not kind of assuming that they're all good with it. So, although most of what I've heard is they're excited about it too. So.
Frey or now? Thank you, Councilmember Merrill.
I think most of the substance of my comments is that I'd like to keep seeing this move forward. I mean, the traffic analyses, the models that we're going to need to have about particularly the stacking, I think are important. I'm concerned about that right turn for buses. That is like the big choke point that seems most possibly prohibitive. So of all of the variables here, I would probably most want to hear from Chapel Hill Transit. And possibilities, for whether that can be ameliorated. I think before we get too far into this, we need to, like, the bus thing is huge. And I don't think a bus option on Weaver would be super viable. Thinking about one-way issues, the space required, the fact that it's already pretty narrow. I think with deliveries of what we're looking at in the packet, very likely the best option is to have that bike path also be a delivery space, to my eye. I also kind of like the idea that the bike area with the bike and delivery space would minimize cyclist pedestrian interaction relative to some of the other ways of doing it. I do think that's important. I don't think, bikes need to be going through at 28 miles an hour heedlessly, but I do think that it will reduce frustration and safety issues if they have a mostly contained cycling facility. And I don't think deliveries would probably hamper that too much. So in the broad strokes, I think, the work that staff has identified that needs to continue, I'd really like to, I think this is totally worthwhile. I think being mindful of deliveries and being careful about the bus, order of operations, responsible use of resources. I think that bus question early, because I think that could really be, that could be the thing that to me is like just an overwhelming problem for equity and sustainability considerations if we're not able to accommodate the bus traffic. But provided we can there, pretty much full steam ahead for me.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think of these, the version that has the service and bike lane combo, I think is the most attractive of them. The version that has the sort of meandering bike lane is maybe the least attractive because it's sort of not terribly efficient for cyclists while also increasing the number of crossing points for pedestrians of the cycle path. It makes sense to have some facility there for deliveries. I think that's something, Jason, when I've talked to I agree that we need to go back around, like specifically, if I understand the packet correctly, there's been some input from business owners generally. I think we need to make sure that we are talking specifically to the business owners who are directly affected. When I've talked to folks in the past, the general sentiment has been, this is great, making that five-way intersection less nuts would really, really help in general, provided that they can still get deliveries in. I think there are also some options to consider involving the Century Center parking lot, which potentially is another way to access all of those businesses quite closely for delivery. But I don't have any objection to having a space that's open, in the early morning for deliveries as well. It's interesting, this idea, you know, whether or not, we're gonna have to look at the bus impact. I noticed that the next set of stops is on Weaver Street, but is pretty close to where it intersects again with Main. So it'd be interesting to know what's the entry and exit from the West Weaver Street stops near West Main. Because if we just pull it down so that it goes along East Main and then turns and goes up onto West Main, that removes any question about turning radius, but it also removes the additional set of stops there on Weaver, or requires us to move them.
That's smart thinking, though.
If you want, the ones that are near where Country Junction are and across the street, you could shift the whole thing down a block, but then we need to know what is the impact of the ridership there as well, because those folks are then having to go down one more block. Yeah, I think you got a good point already made about the turning radius. Yeah.
That's a tight intersection of cliffs.
It's not, it depends on the type of bus, right? It does. Something to note is that I think we're really most likely to see traffic impacts to Main in terms of stacking, like going out towards Chapel Hill. On the flip side, I think Greensboro stands the possibility of getting some better flow, because you don't have people trying to make the right or the left onto Weaver Street anymore. That causes a lot of backup specifically on Greensboro, headed either north or south there. But especially Greensboro headed south. Looking at this, does anyone have any thoughts on this open containers question?
My initial thought was that it was needless, since all of this is happening at present. But as I was thinking about it, I think it's probably a good idea to pursue, because I think in general it's probably, I think the frank reality is that folks would carry, particularly from Weaver Street, and I think it is best to have, I mean, if you think about sort of the geniality of a public space, a bunch of signs about like no alcohol beyond this point, then you raise the issue of enforcement. I think probably the social district is going to have the least friction and least, you know, sort of possibilities, least unnecessary enforcement. So I kind of, as I was sitting here, did a 180 on it, because my initial take was all of the places people, you know, tables I'm not too concerned about. Those tables are there now, but people will move around, I think.
Yeah, I guess my concern with the social district is just the administration of that. My understanding is that like you have to have special cups and they have to be labeled, and you know, so it's not like you can't just, if you crack a beer on the Weaver Street lawn and you wander out in the street, you're still in violation on some level. So I don't know is that accurate? I don't know. If we can just say, hey, in Carrboro you can just walk around here and it's fine, I would be in support of that, but I don't know what if we have that power.
Based on what others have done, I think that would be something where you'd have to identify boundaries for district, and restaurants would have to participate. I think they would have to provide some type of a cup that was labeled for that purpose.
So it's the cups and the signage, right, are the
I think
primary?
so. I think so, yeah.
So there's still kind of an administration challenge there, because, you know, yeah, if we say it's a social district and somebody walks out in the street, technically they're breaking the law. I mean,
Yeah.
which,
Totally.
I mean, I'm not worried about local PD enforcing that and being a problem, but if ALE decides to show up and, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just trying to game out the ways this could work or blow up.
Yeah, I'm pretty unworried about everything except for the sales at Weaver Street. You know, because that's I guess what gets tough is I guess folks have to, like restaurants, I think they would be pretty easily administered.
Right.
But with like a can.
Right. I mean, the reality is people will be
Right.
there
Right.
with open containers, and just
think-
how does that play out?
May I?
Councilmember Palmer, go ahead.
Yeah, just to jump specifically on the social district aspect, I think that this just reemphasizes the point that's already been made by my colleagues that we need to have a back and forth conversation with the existing businesses, but Weaver Street in particular, all of their cashiers have been very good about anytime I've purchased alcohol, asking explicitly and in a friendly manner where I intend to consume it to make sure that their customers are in compliance with the law. So I think that they can update that conversation and have it, but I would like to hear from them directly if that's the concern. But also, and shifting slightly more widely, this is a conversation about imagining a space. And so a big concern that I have is that we be as it doesn't need to be ugly signage, but we need to be as clear as possible about use so that people don't get one impression of what they can or should do and then trip over the implementation. And and a good example is that I least like the meandering path, because if the goal is to slow down cyclists who are transiting it, then we should do that in some other way. A meandering path is not the way, and I say that specifically because in my mind, a big benefit of this. Uh, I'm a parent. I have small children. I take them to Weaver Street when the weather allows. And I don't know about other parents, but there's an invisible leash between me and this child that lengthens or shortens depending on the child's distance from the curb, right? Because there's a very clear understanding that I have about the risk to my child currently on the other side of that curb. And so if we are going to reimagine that space and we're going to give signals that it's safe for a toddler to toddle out into that space, that it needs to be a valid signal, right? So thinking more broadly about when we imagine this place. Wait, I in the staff that, thank you for the question earlier about the in-ground bollards would be, I think, the way that a bus would do it, but I've only ever seen those in like exceedingly high income, like central London. My impression is that those are prohibitively expensive for a town like us, but I would love to hear more about that. Uh, but if we're going to try to tech our way through a solution to uh, this is the behavior that we want, I think we're in for a bad time. Um, but that's just me, and I'm happy to push it back to the room. There, folks have more of a conversation about um, how we want to do that boundary setting for uses. But yes, the question about buses, I sorry, I'm rambling for a long time here, but uh, accessibility and bus service are the two sort of warning bells in the back of my head about how we implement this. If anything, we need more transit, and so any change that we make should absolutely be. If I would hope that we could, in doing this process, make transit better for Carrboro, for downtown Carrboro. Um, so there's got to be a way, and I don't know that we have to go to in-ground bollards first to make that true.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer. I see Councilmember Posada.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, whatever shows up on there, I just want to make sure that folks are safe in that. So this is kind of like my comment piece. I had all my questions answered earlier. I'm also very in line with continuing to plan this out and game this out. I think it'd be a great way of moving Carrboro in a direction that we want to see our downtown reimagined. I am very concerned about, already mentioned, safety of folks on that road, uh, bus routes, and part of the reason I'm very concerned is some of the nonprofits that are on Weaver Street rely on those two bus stops on Weaver Street for folks. Both the one down Weaver Street closer to what is it? What's the El Centro, like a couple blocks down from El Centro, and the one right in front of Weaver Street, because that's where most of those clients who use the bus system end up going. So, and mobility issues of some of the folks like access those services. So I want to make sure that we clear that up. And I think it might have been Mayor Pro Tem now that talked about priorities of like what needs to be done first. I think having the conversation with Transit and figuring out if there's a way to make this happen for me is going to be key in wanting when what I want to see move forward first, or among the first things on this plan. And then not a huge concern, but I want to make sure that we build some parameters so that we don't have a situation where we had last summer for folks being towed. That is a big thing that I'm looking at. So having that conversation with business owners and finding out a way that if someone is parked at the Carmel Mall parking lot and they are at Weaver Street, say they're chilling there and then they decide to go over and get a burger or whatever. I don't want the fact that we created a situation where folks don't have to cross the street and can easily think maybe they're out of town or don't know the situation well, can easily say, all right, I'm no longer on private property, but this is all public or whatever. I don't know. And I want to make sure we're having that conversation because I do not want to have a situation where we had, I think it was last year, a number of months ago, happen as we're trying to make this space. And of course, this wouldn't happen tomorrow. There'd be a lot of time, but those are kind of like my big areas that I want to see move forward as we consider this plan, right? And just to boot, I think the having the that third concept plan or where the third possible plan where the bike lane is just going straight through in one piece. I am full-fledged with that piece, but I've rambled enough. I just wanted to make sure that those are the things that folks understand for me are clear next step before I can consider moving forward this project, or at least as we consider moving forward with this project.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Posada. And so I know when I think about this project, I think about engagement and not just in and around downtown. I think about the community as a whole because, we have folks that come in from other areas than just around central downtown. So everything I've heard from my colleagues, I appreciate and take into consideration. And when I think about the type of space that we may want to create, I think about an inclusive space, where everyone who would come into that space would feel welcome. That's what community is to me. It's belonging. And so those are the types of things that are on my mind as we consider moving forward with this project. Another thing that I wonder is the end goal to close the street and make it pedestrian only, or is it to reduce the traffic that's coming through, because that will determine in what direction we send our staff? I'm feeling like it's to close it completely, potentially maybe, based on information that we may be getting that we'll probably get from staff. But that's one thing that I was thinking about, like, where are we going? Are we going to close it as pedestrian only? Are we looking to reduce traffic? But that may depend on information that we receive in the future. And Tina, I had a couple of questions for you. Could you go to the recommended next steps slide?
Oh, the next one? Oh.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can kind of read from there. So, and looking at the bottom, when we think about possible next steps, we're having our initial conversation minus one council member. Schedule is dependent on NCDOT review turnaround time. So what does that look like, Tina, when you talk about the NCDOT review turnaround time? Do you have any idea about a time frame for that? That seems like something that maybe or maybe not may take some time. But
So, a couple of things. Thanks for the question. So, And the first step, I think, would be the counts. So you'd want to do counts for all modes. And you probably want to do them on a couple of different locations to include, say, the Drakeford Library, maybe Braxton Fouché Street, kind of get that whole broader network just to have a sense of what would happen. And you would probably want to do those, say, March, February, March, when it starts to get a little bit warmer out. You certainly want to do it when all schools are in session. Our understanding from DOT is so they would then get kind of a product after the counts. And it will go to two different groups of folks. The signal folks, depending on where this leads, the signal folks have indicated that it may be as much as 2 months for their review. For the other DOT folks, maybe about half of that. But we have reached out to them already, so they are alerted that this is an interest of the town.
Okay, that's great. And is there a concern about staff capacity for the engagement piece of this? I see staff capacity for engagement. Or would you think you may need help potentially with the engagement piece?
It's a little bit hard to say that right now.
Okay.
And I appreciate the question for that. I think we could have that conversation internally and circle back. We do have a number of initiatives coming this spring. And I think there may be a question, can we partner some of them and, do the same, cover a couple of topics at one engagement, or are we doing a number of different engagements for different topics? I think we can talk about that internally and get back to you on that.
Okay. And then I'm pretty sure you've already started conversations with like Chapel Hill Transit and OWASA. They're aware. There's some awareness there.
We have not spoken to OWASA yet,
Okay.
but we have spoken to Chapel Hill Transit, yes.
Oh, and then the last sentence about the quick bill pilot options. Can you talk about that a little bit? And I assume the pilot is a part of, or could be a part of all of this?
We did ask if, because the signals would need to be changed, there was kind of a question that staff was having as to whether it was even feasible to consider some type of a pilot. And we were able to have to grab DOT and have a conversation on Friday to talk about this. And they indicated that they would consider a potential pilot project if we set up the downtown area as kind of a construction zone. So that, again, this would require an engineer-prepared plan, and it would require changes to the signals. And again, some type of a barricade system. And it would have to be, a barricade that would actually stop vehicles. So it couldn't simply be sawhorses, But that would be something that you all could consider for, say, a 6-month period. You would probably still want to do the counts in advance, and then do the counts again, say, for example, you did this, say, March to September. That way you would get school in session, and you would also be able to get a sense of the summer months when more people would be out, both during the spring and then also in the summer when it may be a little bit hot for some folks. So that is certainly something that you could consider. Our understanding, checking with the town engineer, is that cost, if you were to proceed with that, would likely also be around $50,000.
Thank you so much, Tina. And great job on the pocket questions. They were very helpful as we considered the information. And I think I'm thinking the last question is, when might we see this come back? Because I think there's high interest, in proceeding, but there's some information gathering and conversations, correct?
Sure. We can work with the manager to schedule a following item. We did check in with the finance director, so we would want to, staff would prepare another agenda item to talk about where the funds would come from. And so that would be another step. But we could, in that interim, reach out to Chapel Hill Transit and try to get a little bit more information about that turning radius.
Right, and more than likely, this $300,000 here for the total could go up. Probably will.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Have something else? Mayor Pro Tem Nell.
Just to, I mean, it's unlikely we're going to crack this better than y'all, and Chapel Hill Transit would too. But to, I do want to not lose sight of, I think Councilmember Frey's really good point that we may not be talking about that turn radius. So I just, you know, moving it to possibly Maine, I just kind of wanted to underscore the possibility that, you know, with just opening it up with Chapel Hill Transit I don't want to over-index on a problem that we identified here with a sense of more capacious analysis may not. But of course you would be on that, so pardon my being redundant.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Nell. Any other questions for Tina? Also, Councilmember Posada and Palmer, any more questions? Looks like not.
Madam Mayor, I have a couple thoughts to add here.
Go ahead, Councilmember Frey.
It's something that I think we sort of brushed past that was really valuable about the presentation, and I just wanted to call it out, is the way that all of these options include some stormwater component. This sort of has the opportunity to be this has the opportunity for it to be a lab for us in thinking about how we are reimagining our streets in the larger scale, longer term, right? If we're thinking about what do we want transportation to look like in Carrboro in 70 years from now, it's not going to be as much pavement as it is, right? We're probably going to need an awful lot of stormwater features built in what's currently right-of-way.
Yep.
We're probably going to need a lot of established, safe bike infrastructure in what's currently right-of-way. So thinking about, okay, so what is, you know, taking that 30-foot curb to curb and saying, okay, great, so how do we make this something that is a stormwater utility and a transportation utility and also a nicer space to be than a street full of cars? If we're able to do that, I think this could actually be a great, I'm not talking about, I don't know that we necessarily need a pilot for this closure. If we do the counts and it works out, I don't know if we need to go through a pilot closing. But the project itself could serve as a pilot for a larger rethinking of how we do transportation in Carrboro. It's also the first link, if you sort of look at the map and think about where our bike ped transportation corridors are, that's a critical link in sort of starting to get an east-west, like, continuous bike ped facility built that's not just a sharrow or a painted lane, but actually is completely separated from vehicle traffic. So I'm really enthusiastic about this because I think it's sort of that kernel that we can grow a lot of other transportation improvements around. Madam Mayor, I think you had a sort of a question like, are we trying to close it completely, make it pedestrian only, or are we trying to reduce traffic? I think we're trying to close it completely to cars, other than, we're trying to close this to motor vehicles with maybe a very narrow exception for delivery only during a specific window. Because I think that's what's going to give us the most benefit.
Yeah, we had other options. So, that was my question. I didn't know we were excluding, honestly.
Yeah, but I also don't think
we might be looking for something more that would be accommodating for all, no matter how they travel, holistically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know this isn't motions and we're not going for something to take a vote, but I would just like to throw in my hat in that same, that's where my gut is right now. And I'm open to being moved based on conversations. I'm even open to, like, as was brought up, the Century Center parking lot. If there are alternatives that mean that we don't need to even have that exception, I am open to, there's no motorized vehicle transit of this space. But just to answer your question, Ms. Mayor, that's where I'm sitting now, is a preference for not having motor vehicles through here at all.
And so let's remember the road diet that was done. I'm not sure how many years ago now. I was on the council.
It wasn't that long
I think
ago.
maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but that's why I asked the question earlier, because it would give staff a better direction. As always, it is whatever the majority of this council wants to do is the direction that we will be going in. But certainly hearing from everyone that it is the desire of the council to close this space to motor vehicles gives the signal to staff that we are not necessarily we're not looking for a reduction in traffic. Councilmember Posada.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The only thing I wanted to add to that piece is I still do, so right now I'm very much in line with not just closing it off to motor vehicles, but I'm not like 100% there. I want to hear back from specifically community members that would be directly impacted by this piece, right? So I think in the presentation there was 2 neighborhoods mentioned, Lloyd and Tin Top neighborhoods.
Yep, Lloyd
I want to
Broad,
make
Tin Top. That's the
that
engagement piece, Councilmember Posada, that is going to be so key to a lot of this. Thank you for raising that. Go ahead.
Yes. That's exactly where I was going. I want to make sure that as we're doing engagement, that is taken into consideration. So for now, I'm in, in the brand of, not the brand, in line with closing it off to motor vehicles, except for those delivery services at particular times of the day. But like I want to hear from folks to see how that impacts them before a final decision is made, at least for me on that side.
Right, and I appreciate you. I appreciate you saying that. Again, I'm going to go back to creating a space that's inclusive for everyone, and I don't know how to do that, but I'm going to say it until I can't say it anymore, because I think that is really important. This is a major change in the core of our downtown, and we get all types of people that come through, and so we want to create a warm, inviting, inclusive space for folks. That is really important in all of this. Any other comments, council members? Councilmember Posada or Palmer? No? Frey, Mayor Pro Tem, no.
One last stray thought, which is, as we're thinking about the budget, we don't necessarily have to go all the way to full plaza-like amenities right up front. We have the opportunity to stages, right, to say, okay, we're going to close it, but we're going to, remark the pavement, leave the pavement. Okay, and now we're going to pull up some of the pavement, put in some stormwater
You're talking
features.
like
And
a phase-in,
you could
like a
phase
phase-in.
it to get a feel for it.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for me.
Anyone else?
Timeline.
All right.
In addition to the timeline, in addition to the pocket question, is just one thing I wanted to shout out staff one last time. That looks a lot like I think what we've been asking for a lot. It really helped this discussion for me to have those possible time ranges. So just one more last little thing that came to me. Sorry to thank you.
No, and I also thank you both to Heidi, who wrote into the council, but it was also in the packet that previously this stretch was closed for some pipe work, and that wasn't that long ago. And echoing the unfortunate events in Louisiana, I was at UNC when there was an incident in the pit. So getting safety features right, that if our intention is to exclude SUVs, then we need to be able to do that super consistently. So
We hear you. There's a lot that's going to be asked of this project, so let's get ready for the ride. Anything else, council members? So we have asked questions, we've discussed and advised on next steps. Anything we need to add before we close it out potentially at 7:04 p.m.?
Madam Mayor, a suggestion for you to consider, whether we could give a little space in case there's any staff members in attendance who have questions based on what they've heard from us. Is there anything they want to ask back to sort of drive
That would
a
be
further loop?
Town Manager Tom. I don't mind
Well,
doing it,
so
but-
I think we really heard you all. They've been definitely taken notes, and we will re-meet. We heard that safety is first. We definitely want to check on the bus routes with the transit, and opportunities around that. Safety, the perception, bollards that need to be pretty, that can block vehicle access, delivery points for the current businesses, a bike lane that is straightforward and not
Not meandering.
meandering. So I think we have enough from what you all have said tonight to then repackage and then come back once they have a few more data points and updates and confirmation from Chapel Hill Transit in particular, and further engagement with the communities that the mayor and Councilmember Posada have noted. And then creating a space to make sure council members can directly talk to the business owners and things like that. So, staff, do y'all have any additional thoughts? Okay.
Sounds good. Do you, May? April?
I would
Afraid to
say
say.
we will actively work on getting more information and relooking at the options that you all have shared, your desire for the space, even potential social districts, pros and cons for that and what that may look like, our legal parameters around that as well. So as soon as we have updates, we will put it back on an agenda and discuss it.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Town Manager.
I think May is reasonable, but,
Okay. Yeah, I won't hold you to it.
okay, thank you.
All right. Is there a motion? He off mute already. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you so much. It's been moved and properly seconded that we adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thanks to
Motion
IT
carries.
staff. Thanks to IT staff for the Zoom. I appreciate it. Good night.